Welcome to Retail Crime Uncovered, the go-to podcast for anything and everything retail crime related. I'm your host, Professor Emmeline Taylor. So I feel a little bit silly even introducing my next guest. He's so often on the telly, on the radio. I think most people in the retail space are very familiar with Paul Gerrard. He's the Campaigns and Public Affairs Director at the Co-op. Paul, I'm so delighted to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure always.
Let's talk a bit about the Safer Colleagues, Safer Communities campaign. So this has been running for several years now. I was honoured to be involved in the report. It's not part of the job that highlighted the, shocking levels of violence, verbal abuse that shop workers were experiencing on an all too frequent basis. Now that was back in 2018 that I did the field work, and I remember launching that report in 2019 in the House of Commons and really being quite shocked by the findings. I'm a criminologist. I hear lots of, horrific stories of crime and violence, but this everyday sort of ongoing threat and, concern that these shop workers had while they're just trying to serve their communities was really hard hitting for me. Now, obviously, that was a few years ago. Things seem to have got worse as well, don't they? So the campaign is sort of relaunching. It's always been bubbling away. It's had some really great successes. But tell us about this particular sort of stage of the campaign that we're in.
I worked in law enforcement and customs excise. And I've done night shifts at Dover when people are bootlegging through cigarettes and hand-on tobacco. I've done, street selling for cigarettes and tobacco and alcohol in the streets in North London. I've done oils jobs in Northern Ireland. I'm used to a law enforcement background. I was shocked is an understatement. The abuse and violence that my colleagues were facing when we first started to talk about this very loudly in 2018. And we were fortunate as well, by the way. It comes back to the point about partnership. We were fortunate that we started to talk about this back in 2018. Of course, Usdaw have been talking about this for 20 odd years. And I think the most important thing for us was to stand absolutely shoulder to shoulder with Usdaw. And I think it supported the Usdaw campaign, and we're very proud to do so. I guess the thing that struck me is that when we talked in 2018, and when you first did this, and I think it's a bit more than contribute to the research. I think it's not part of the job, absolutely defined and has defined the conversation for the last 6 or 7 years. I think it was the violence and the abuse. That was just remarkable. And I think actually during the pandemic, it got worse. But then I think what's changed is that that's still around, absolutely. And yes, my colleagues, and they face it every day. 100 of my colleagues will be abused or attacked today and tomorrow and yesterday and every day next week. What's changed, I think, is the level of organised criminality who are targeting our stores to steal things to resell. So I think that's the difference. So whereas before you had people stealing and getting very angry in shops and abusing and attacking shop workers, absolutely. And we got somewhere. We got a standalone offence in Scotland, and we got an aggravated offence in England and Wales. What we've seen in the last 12 months has been this just tsunami increase of theft. And it's not, there are some people who are stealing for themselves, but in the main, this isn't people who are stealing for themselves. We've seen a 44% increase in theft. That's costing us £75 million a year, every year. What's driving that increase is organised criminal gangs and individuals who are targeting for resale.
Yeah, definitely. And it seems to be, it's absolutely getting more attention now, but I still think there's that narrative that people think, oh, shoplifting, it's a tin of beans, it's a Mars bar, without realising the bulk theft. I've heard you describe it as looting, and, lots of shop workers saying, actually, no, this is people clearing entire shelves, maybe even coming back the same day once it's been restocked and clearing those shelves again with, using wheelie bins, suitcases to get the goods and then sell it on. I wonder as well, does there need to be more focus on the people that are profiting from that on sale of goods? So, we know that maybe it could be smaller businesses, it could be cafes, restaurants that are either selling it on or serving it up to customers for profit, but also people who are then maybe putting it online, selling it on community groups. Do you feel there's enough attention there in terms of disrupting those illicit markets?
No, but I think with what I think I've been genuinely surprised by, I'm happy to have been surprised, is that when we really started to talk about this again last summer, so that was summer 2023, and we began to put out the data that says we've seen a 35% increase, and at that time, by the end of the year, it was 44% increase. And it's about people's targeting shops to steal large volumes, as you said, which they then resell. I think what was interesting is that when we first did the first media, I remember it distinctly because it was 5:30 in the morning in Salford doing Wake Up to Money. Trust me, I remembered that specifically. But that was a Thursday. By the Saturday, the National Police Chiefs Council had basically said nothing to see here. There isn't a problem. We follow it all up. That initial media was like, there's no problem, and that sort of end of July, beginning of August. By the time you get to October, and we did party conference season, suddenly you had government minister saying this is a real problem, and by October the 23rd, you had a retail crime action plan. And I think that remarkable change from nothing to see here to all there is, and we're going to attend if you've got someone detained, if it's a prolific offender, youth offender, evidence to collect. I think that's quite a remarkable shift. And what it's done, I think, is get the police thinking about, hang on, if this volume of product is being sold, it's being stolen, and it's clearly not, you don't steal 100 pieces of protein to feed yourself, right? You steal it to sell. That's being sold somewhere. To distribute that volume of illicit goods, you need a level of organisation, which means there are people profiting from this. You know, the individuals who are stealing it in store are often quite, often not always, but often quite vulnerable. It could be substance abuse, it could be mental health issues, it could be any number of things. It could be trafficking and gangs and county lines. I think the fact that the police are now attending, and I think they've recognised it. I think they're seeing that this is connected to something much bigger. And I was going to say more important, it's not more important, but much bigger. So when we sort of began to talk about this very loudly last summer, we started on, I remember it distinctly, it was the 27th of July. It was a 5:30 start in Salford at Media City with Wake Up to Money on Radio 5 Live. The conversation then, and we got a lot of media on that day and on the coming days. That was a Thursday, I think. By the time you got to the Saturday, the response from the police was nothing to see here. It was the front page of the Times. Nothing to see here. There isn't a problem. Very quickly then, it turned because what we were saying resonated. Everyone recognised it. And so suddenly you fast forward a couple of months to get to October 23rd, and there's nothing to see here. It's like, yeah, there is a problem. We recognise that. Here's the retail crime action plan. We're going to take action now. And of course, I think the police becoming aware of that and recognising that, I'm a former law enforcement officer. My brother was a former policeman. I'm not going to slag off the police. I've got no interest in that. But what it did mean is that the police then began to pay attention, began to think about, hang on, if someone's stealing 100 pieces of meat and protein, then it's not for themselves. They're going to sell it, and they're doing it 2-3 times a day from different stores. That volume of product being sold illegally requires someone to be. You can't do that safely in communities unless you are connected to people who have got a say over those things. And therefore, there are organising minds here that are making money. And of course, my assumption would be, having done this back in the 2000s with custom excise, is that the people that we targeted on cigarette smuggling, for example, weren't just doing cigarette smuggling. They were doing Class A drugs, and they were doing racketeering and prostitution, and these are multifaceted criminal organisations. And I think the police are recognising that it's a very serious issue on retail crime, and it's part of a portfolio of criminal activity that those individuals got. And I think that's why Operation Pegasus, which the co-op is one of the funders for, is really important. Because I think it's beginning to get into who's behind this and who's making serious money out of this. Because unless you begin to tackle that, all you're really doing is taking out vulnerable individuals, often who are being paid for a fix or for a bottle of vodka, whatever it is. Well, they are very dispensable to these organisations.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, you articulate that really well, that, once you start to pull the thread on what seems to be sort of, or what's described as like petty theft or, a minor acquisitive crime. Actually, the things that it links into is so scary. And, some of the interviews I've done with co-op shop workers as well, talking about how clear it is that sometimes, there's criminal exploitation, sometimes exploitation of children, using kids because they're under the age of criminal responsibility. You very quickly get into some really unsavory activity. And I think that is, absolutely what's so important about Pegasus, but also understanding the local picture as well. As you said, the co-ops in communities, quite often it's the only store in those locations, and the impact of potentially them not being able to operate is, would be devastating for those communities.
It is, and that's the bit that there's a couple of bits that frustrated me over this. Part of it, one of the frustrations as we've begun to talk about this is that, and I said before, I understand some of this. I was a senior law enforcement officer for a number of years in Her Majesty's Customs and Excise. You look at what Katie Bourne's done in Sussex, and you look at what Operation Synergy's done in Nottingham, and you look at some of the work in Essex, and the first frustration is you see that where police forces think, yeah, this is important, take it seriously, work with us in particular, you can have real outcomes there. So the frustration that it's fixable and people weren't bothered to was frustrating. The other thing, though, I think, and it sort of underpins why that is the idea that the harm here is relatively small. There is a significant harm to shop workers who may be attacked, seriously physically attacked or abused, but even if they're not, will see their stores the subject of serious criminal activity every day with an underlying threat every day. There's the risk that poses to those shops in the sense that there comes a point for businesses, and I know some businesses we haven't, but I know some businesses have got to this point where they can no longer viably run a commercial shop and keep colleagues safe and keep products safe. So they close those shops. And what does that mean? That means, well, you only have to look at communities that are facing tough times and have got real challenges, and you'll see boarded up shops. You just will, because that's what it is. And therefore, what has frustrated me is that sometimes police haven't recognised the harm that an impact this kind of crime can have in the short and long term, but particularly in communities. Because you're right, I think 20% of our stores are the only viable option for people to buy food in communities. We're the only shop there. If we were to close that shop, you'd have food deserts. You'd have communities where there's no, real presence from food retail. This is serious stuff, and I think only recently has that harm and threat and impact began to be recognised properly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, you only need to look to the US as well and see the impact of some of them food deserts, people having to travel significant distances for fresh food at an affordable price, and quite often medicines as well. It's not just the grocery, it's, all the other products that are sold there. Many businesses sort of would hide away from, sort of highlighting the reality of crime that they're experiencing. They might think it'll upset customers or damage their brand. But the co-op's been so incredibly transparent. The media that came out over the summer, citing 1,000 incidents a day that, really bringing to the fore the reality of violence, abuse, prolific theft. Why do you think it's important to sort of go against the grain and say, no, hang on, we need to make this public and really discuss it?
So, I remember when we first started to talk about retail crime back in 2018, 2019, there was a conversation with my colleagues in our media teams who are great, and actually the reason we've had the cut through we've had is that the quality and expertise of my colleagues in the co-op media team is remarkable. That's why they've got us onto all these platforms. But there was a genuine concern, hang on, we don't want to describe our stores as being somewhere that isn't safe. And what's interesting is that I think the reality is, if you want to get change, you've got to be honest about the problems you face. You can't pretend. And, I worked in government long enough that if someone says it's really bad, we'll give them the data. We don't want to. Well, I'm sorry, I can't work with you telling me it's bad. I can work with 1,000 incidents a day. I think I'm fortunate in that because the co-op is a cooperative society, we're not a PLC. That means we can take positions that other businesses would feel uncomfortable because they will be concerned about institutional shareholders, etc. And indeed, the fiduciary responsibilities of directors in PLCs is different to those in a cooperative society. So I think I'm quite fortunate the co-op is willing to do that and is comfortable doing that. But the reality is you're only going to get change if you have a proper data-driven factual conversation with officials and law enforcement people so they understand the issue and you can begin to do it. Also, if I'm honest, those numbers and the stories of my, I did a lot of the media, but some of my frontline colleagues did media as well. Dave up in Leeds, a few of my colleagues in London. What's interesting then is that the media are interested because it's not just it's really bad. It's 1,000 incidents a day. It's 44% up. It's that genuine data is something the media can engage with, and this isn't about media profile. If you want to change things, you've got to make an issue politically salient. What we did over the summer, in end of July, August, September, is make retail crime salient, politically salient. And it's the pressure that brought that resulted in what the police did. And it also, I think, because the co-op can do it, it also then allowed other retailers to come in behind. So you then had John Lewis and Sainsbury's and Tesco and others. And honestly, I'm fine with that. You don't achieve anything just by the co-op saying it's terrible. You achieve something by the co-op and Tesco and Sainsbury's and Morrison's and all whoever coming together. So I have no problem with other businesses coming behind us or indeed going out front. It's the whole sector that will deliver change. We're fortunate that as a cooperative society, I think we have more. We are more comfortable with being very transparent, and we are on a whole range of issues.
Yeah, definitely.
So I was going to say, just as an example of that transparency, I remember back in 2019, in our modern slavery statement, we wrote in our modern slavery statement, we will have slavery in our extended supply chains. And at the time, I was like, oh my God. And it's just a statement of fact. If a business doesn't believe that, any business of size doesn't believe that slavery in the supply chains, they're either deliberately lying or they're stupid or they're not looking. Right, but I think us saying that, and it wasn't just us at the time, it was also, I think BT did the same as well. It's that transparency. You've got to have a real conversation about this. You can't pretend. It's got to be a real conversation.
Yeah, because if you don't acknowledge it, how on earth are you then going to begin tackling it?
Absolutely.
I mean, it was fantastic to see, the moment when the other retailers then did start saying, yeah, same here, same here. I mean, unfortunate, of course, but it was brilliant to see that support. And then obviously the letter that went to the Home Secretary at the time, 88 retail leaders signing up to that. Now, we've just published the report looking at the policing of prolific local offenders. And it's always an absolute pleasure to work with the co-op and work, directly speaking to your colleagues, going out to stores and really trying to understand the issues that are being faced. I'm really shocked again by some of the stories though. We've touched upon it a little bit already, but I think one of the things for me is really that sort of cumulative harm, the impact of having such pride in your store. Many colleagues describe it as an extension of their home. It's like their living room, and they're proud to display and serve their customers, and then to have people come in and just take things, and increasingly very blasé. It was so many people talk to me about, these offenders, they don't cover their face anymore. They sort of taunt, they might laugh at a shop worker as well, so what are you going to do? There's no consequence. So I think for me, that's been quite hard hitting again. What sort of changes would you like to see? You've talked about the police sort of stepping up now, government are taking attention, but what more sort of concrete actions do you think need to be taken to reverse this trend of the epidemic of shop theft?
Paul, your finger on it there. It's about risk and reward. There's a reason that someone comes into a co-op store. It could be a Tesco Extra or a Sainsbury's local, or a local convenience store in particular. And the reason they come in with a hold all and take out all the meat, and they don't cover the faces. And the reason they don't cover the faces is they know that if they threaten, then our colleagues are not going to put themselves in harm's way, and I would never want them to, and we tell them not to. But they also know that there's no risk there because the police aren't going to come. We did a Freedom of Information request at the start of 2023, and it said that we only report serious incidents And when we asked the police how often they turned up for those reports, they didn't turn up in 70% of cases. When we detain offenders, when our specialist undercover teams provided by our security contractor detain offenders, make a citizen's arrest, in the first 9 months of 2023, even though we had the individual in our custody waiting for the police to come and complete the arrest, the police weren't turning up in 79% of cases. What that says to you is that effectively, if I'm a retail criminal, no one's going to stop me. No one's going to stop me, and the police aren't coming. So unless a retail worker wants to try and stop me, and if they do, I'll threaten them and worse. There's no consequence for me. So I think the key thing that you've got to get is you've got to get, number one, the police attending. I don't want to expect the police to attend every incident, nor should they actually, but I do expect them to attend where there's a prolific offender, where there's evidence, where someone's detained, where there's violence. Absolutely do. And that's in the Retail Crime Action Plan. How would you make that happen? With the police, have got to, you've got to have the right data streams to make sure that you understand what's happening. You're going to have the right amount of capacity in the organisation. I also think you have to have the right toolkit. A key thing for me is what we've seen in Scotland is that when Daniel Johnson MSP brought in the bill, it's now the Protection of Retail Workers Act. What we've seen, we're told by the police in Scotland, is that now where there is an offender identified, where there is a report made of violence, 60% of occasions someone is arrested.
Wow,
now in England and Wales, that's nowhere near. Now, why is that? Part of it, actually, the reason is that the legislation has given it a profile. The legislation has made it easier to understand what offence. That's the reason, and therefore I think a critical thing is about get the police there, and there's some early indications. We're speaking in on the 2nd of February, aren't we? There's some early indications that the police have responded to the Retail Crime Action Plan and that they are attending more, and that's really welcome.
I mean, last year the law was changed in England and Wales, so it's an aggravated offence to assault someone performing a public duty, not specifically a retail worker, but somebody who's performing that public duty. And the co-op absolutely pioneered in terms of this legislative change. I think a shout out to Alex Norris, who's now the Shadow Minister for Policing, who did a huge amount in terms of the 10-minute bill that he brought in and really raising the profile of this issue. So obviously that was passed as an amendment, as a broader piece of legislation. And the co-op now are campaigning again, saying, OK, great, move in the right direction, but we need a standalone offence for shop workers. Why is that so important on top of what's already been brought in?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think first reason is messaging. Legislation is often about sending a message, and if you make attacking a shop worker a standalone offence, you are sending a message to shop workers to say we do care, we do recognise the job that you do, and we do recognise the unbelievable levels of violence and abuse that you are currently suffering. And by the way, the level of violence and abuse was the same reason that government brought in the emergency workers protections a couple of years ago, right? So send a message to the workers. Secondly, send a message to the police, the criminal justice system. Parliament, the legislature of this country, think this is important. And the third thing is send a message to those who are offending to say, this is serious. We've passed legislation. We're looking for the police to use that legislation. So this is a messaging point, which is really, really important. I think practically, what we have seen in Scotland, where there is a standalone offence, is what we've seen is that offence has provided real sharp focus for the police in Scotland. Now, interestingly, in Scotland, data we've been given by Police Scotland says that where there is a report made using, there's an instance of violence and abuse, the police in Scotland are arresting someone in 60% of reports. Now,
wow, gosh, that's huge.
We're nowhere close to that. Now, why? No, why? Because the police know it's important. There's a very simple, straightforward offence that says this is what it is, and that I think has so that's made a difference. So it works. It works. So I think those two reasons are the most important, in that the message it sends, the fact that it works, but also there are some suggestions, indicators and data that says since the Retail Crime Action Plan, we're beginning to see an improved picture. And that's fine. But if you want to maintain it, you've got to give the police the tools they need to do the job. And that's one of the tools. So it's very straightforward for them to investigate and prosecute this, or for the CPS to prosecute it. So that's why I think standalone offence is important. I think it's messaging, I think it works, and I think it provides that sustainable toolkit that means that when the police turn up, they know what they can do, and it's straightforward for them to do so.
I think we're going to see a lot more attention on that as well in the coming months. And yeah, fingers crossed that, you know, shop workers do get the protection that they deserve for doing what isn't an easy job a lot of the time.
And Emily, sorry. I mean, there's an amendment that's been placed by the Labour Party to the current criminal justice bill, which would create a standalone offence. I guess the other point that I would make, and I gave evidence to the House of Commons Public Bill Committee on the criminal justice bill before Christmas. One of the points I made to them is that if you are expecting, if this place, i.e. Parliament, expects a group of people to uphold the law and to have certain obligations, age-related sales, cigarettes, other things, and that if they don't uphold those obligations, they will be prosecuted themselves. So if you do sell alcohol to an underage person, you could face sanction. If Parliament expects people to do that, Parliament has also got to give them, it has a moral responsibility to give those people the right protection. And the fact that the smoking ban that government is going to introduce, that means you don't sell cigarettes depending on age, and effectively, if you're under 16 now, you're never ever going to buy cigarettes. It'll be shop workers that enforce that. And if you have a 28-year-old saying in 10 years' time, I want to buy some cigarettes, the answer is no, then the shop workers could be in serious difficulty. You've got to provide those shop workers with the protections that they need. Otherwise,
absolutely,
the deal between Parliament and people is broken.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. You're on the telly quite a lot these days. Quite often, you know, I'm just flicking through, and then I was like, oh, there's Paul on the radio, in the papers. You're clearly a natural in the limelight. How have you found it? Do you enjoy it?
There's a great irony. I stammer. My mum stammered. My sister stammers. I'm 52 now, so I've got used to it. But there is something slightly perverse that someone with a stammer makes their living by speaking. It is slightly ridiculous. Do I enjoy it? Not particularly, not especially. It's not something I would run to do. But I think it's an important part of my role, and I think I can be effective. Some things I've enjoyed. I'm a bit of a political nerd, so doing the Today programme was like, yeah, I've done the Today programme. That was quite good. After the event, I got a phone call. I did this morning when Holly Willoughby and Dermot O'Leary were presenting, and I did it from my local store. And I did it, and it was live. It was live, and it went. I was really pleased with it. On the way back from the store, after having filmed it, I get a phone call from my daughter Emma, who says, "Oh, we've just watched you on TV, Dad. You were great." I said, "Oh, but I was on 5 Live this morning at 6 o'clock or whatever." And she went, "Oh, well, my daughter's a university student." She said, "Well, we weren't up for that, Dad." So right, okay, that's fine.
So I love you, Dad, but not that much.
Yeah.
You're not going to get out of bed at 5
So there's been some slightly bizarre things, being interviewed by Holly and Dermot was, doing Today programme was great. Interestingly, some of the interviews, it's not the interviews that you think will be tough that are tough. So I remember being interviewed by Helen Skelton on 5 Live. She really, challenged whether businesses were doing enough. And I think, perhaps it's my own prejudice, but perhaps I didn't expect to get that kind of interview on 5 Live, but I did. And it was good because it allowed me to make the case. And if I couldn't make the case, then I stand off all by that. But it was interesting. It's not always the interviews that you think will be difficult and that was one of the most challenging interviews.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah. I bet you just managed it perfectly though. But yeah, I mean, it's really incredible just how mainstream, Holly Willoughby, it's like, it's fantastic coverage. And just lastly,
sorry, Emily, I was going to say, there's people now in the media who I've been interviewed more than once by, and they remember. So I remember doing LBC with Nick Ferrari. Again, Nick Ferrari's can be quite a challenge, but he's always fair and he's always straight. And I said to him, I've spoken to you before about this, and he said, I remember extremely well, Paul. You were talking about, so the fact that we're now, I do think the co-op's the voice of business on this issue. and my colleagues in our media team do a phenomenal job. But we are getting to the point where some people do sort of know us and would look for our views on these issues now, which I think is great credit to the. Oh,
Definitely. No, it really is. It's incredible to have moved into that sort of space where, it's politics, it's business, it's society. There's so many different issues that you've become, a spokesperson for, which is incredible. I just wanted, lastly, so, I think people watching this might be looking at some of the book titles behind you. I know that you're a really big music fan. We've spoken before about some of our, sort of heroes, musical heroes. What are you listening to at the moment? What do you sort of relax to after a hard week's campaigning?
I am a big music fan. Music's one of my real passions. I'm quite a tribal music fan. I like what I like, and everything else is rubbish. Which isn't the best way, is it? To be honest with you. So look, I like punk, post-punk, new wave, from sort of late 70s, early 80s. Love that stuff. We're both man unions. I love the whole Manchester scene, New Order, Joy Div, Roses, Smiths. Love all that. I'm quite a fan of folk music, old folk music, because I play guitar badly, and some beautiful folk guitar. People like, if anyone, there's a song by a guy called Martin Joseph called "Song for Nye," as in Nye Bevan. Listen to it; it's just remarkable. It's just folk music, unbelievable. But I tend to like what I like. So what does it mean? What do I listen to? I guarantee you, this evening I will listen to some Stuart Adamson from Big Country or Skids. Remarkable. Stuart Adamson's one of the most innovative guitarists we've ever produced in this country, and much missed. And the other one, of course, will be Johnny Marr. I went to watch Johnny Marr at the Factory International before Christmas with the full orchestra. Just remarkable. He's a remarkable guitarist, and he comes across as a remarkable man. And again, this summer I'll be going to watch Phenomenal, and you should get a ticket for this, Emily. It's Rasheed Murphy from Moloko opening, followed by Johnny Marr and his band, followed by New Order at Wythenshawe Park.
Oh wow, that is a
So
hot ticket to have.
Isn't it just? Isn't it just? There's my advert for New Order and Johnny.
Love it. I'm going to go and have a rifle through my record collection, I think, now. Paul, it's been amazing. It's been so good to talk to you. You're always so inspiring. Yeah, real role model of mine. You've taught me so much in terms of the campaigns. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights today.
Pleasure always. I mean, and I did mean what I said before. The work that you did in 2018, 2019, It's Not Part of the Job, has literally defined this whole debate for the last six years. So we're very lucky to have your insights and support on those issues.
Thank you. That means a huge amount to me. Thanks, Paul.